Hi, and welcome to the Trusted Executive Podcast. I'm here again with Dr. John Blakey, the founder of the Trusted Executive Foundation, which helps CEOs and leaders across all sectors around the globe create a new standard of leadership defined by trustworthiness. John's work has been featured in Forbes, BBC News, Huff Post, and the Sunday Times. So welcome, John.
Welcome, David. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Great. Now, people listened to it before, they know that the idea of this podcast is to help you as listeners gain a practical understanding of the potential benefits of the trusted executive model to you through taking a deep dive with each of the 9 leadership habits which underpin the model. Now, as you say in the book, John, you didn't just dream up these 9 habits over a glass of red wine. They're a product of 6 years of evidence-based research at Aston Business School for your doctorate, involving over 500 board-level leaders. And with a deep passion, you offer the business world an academically rigorous and relevant answer to the question, how do I do trust and why does it matter? So, John, from your research and as introduction for those maybe listening for the first time, why should they care about trust? And in a nutshell, what did you discover in your research?
Well, trust is the one thing that changes everything, David. That's a soundbite, but it's a soundbite that's backed up by many years of academic research that trust has been proven to have an impact on various business outcomes, ranging from profitability to employee engagement, to stress levels, to creativity and innovation, to customer loyalty, and so on and so on. So trust is a magic wand. And I think it's a magic wand that, particularly in this day and age, the expectation on leaders and brands is that we should be aspiring to build those high trust cultures and those high trust brands in a 21st century context.
Thank you, John. And I'm hearing actually more and more talk about trust, where people are looking to sort of say which organization, or as you said, which brand can I trust at this time? Because it's where they will potentially place their business. It's perhaps where they turn to first as to, can I trust this organization? Can I trust this person? Can I trust who I'm dealing with here?
Yeah, I was reading a survey this week, the Edelman Trust Barometer, and they asked a question, 33,000 respondents, what are those most important buy-in criteria when choosing to buy from a certain brand? And the trustworthiness of the brand is second only to price in terms of people's selection criteria for the brands that they engage with and want to build relationships with. And I think, what we've seen over the last 10 years, and we can expect to see more of it in the next 10 years, is that the trustworthiness of that brand and the leaders of that brand is going to be more and more in the spotlight, given the concerns of the modern day citizen.
I agree. And of course, we've been working on this podcast, we're going through the various habits. And today we're going to do a deep dive with habit number 8, choosing to be brave, which sits under the 3rd pillar of benevolence. Now, as I always say, actually, I'm really drawn to the fact that each habit starts with the word choosing, which makes it very, very intentional for me. And I know you say in your work as well, that the habits are something that can be worked with and trust can be developed. And I think you say actually that a habit is an accumulation of choices. So as we turn to choosing to be brave, what does this mean for you, John, and what benefits does it provide to organizations and leaders?
Yeah, when we talk about each of the habits, David, I've often contrasted the habit of power with the habit of trust, because part of this change that we're experiencing is the shift from power as the currency of leadership to trust as the currency of leadership. And a lot of us have learned habits in the world of power. And what we're doing with this model is encouraging leaders to unlearn habits of power and relearn the habits of trust. And if you think about that habit of being brave, in the world of power, bravery typically meant personal or physical bravery. It's a very heroic model of leadership. So we're thinking of the often white male leader on the white steed charging into battle, shouting, "Follow me." And that was the sort of stereotypical model of bravery in the world of power. Now, in the world of trust, bravery comes in a different packaging. The bravery of the world of trust is not that physical or personal bravery. it's moral bravery. What inspires trust in others is if you as a leader are seen to self-sacrifice at a certain point in the cycle in the interest of the wider good and the bigger cause. So whether that's a brand or whether that's an individual leader, it's that moral bravery that inspires trust. And that's the shift, I think, from that personal, physical bravery of the world of power to the moral bravery of the world of trust.
Mm. So I think you do say in the book, it's around at times, perhaps as a leader or group of leaders of an organization, taking a stand. I think you talk about sticking your neck out for the greater good.
Yeah, I use that colloquialism in the book. It is an academic model, but I don't mind a little bit of colloquialism thrown in for good measure. Yeah, sticking your neck out for the wider good. And you asked about what are the benefits of that. Mm-hmm. The benefits of sticking your neck out for the wider good, other than the moral sort of benefit, the moral cause. But if you looked at it purely at a practical level, it's really about pioneering. That people who challenge the status quo, who are willing to have a voice and speak up for something different and be brave to do that, then often we in hindsight look at those people as pioneers. I mean, you think of Steve Jobs and his pioneering. He had the bravery to offer us a product in the iPad that we didn't even know that we wanted, which now has brought great benefit to many people in terms of access to information and all the benefits that technology brings. So leaders, that bravery is often associated with pioneering, with innovation, with change, and those who seize the moment to change and are ahead of the curve often reap the benefit in terms of a competitive advantage. So as well as the moral aspect of this habit, there is a very practical leadership benefit from being brave enough to take a risk on behalf of delivering a mission.
And perhaps the difference we're seeing now, John, is actually you said to be brave, it's for a mission, but it's for a mission, as we have been talking, that is more than just for greater profit. You talk about, don't you, the triple bottom line, and that's maybe, is that the perspective we're looking at here?
Yeah, I think that shift again from the world of power was all about the single bottom line of profit. Mm-hmm. The world of trust is about the triple bottom line of results, relationships, and reputation. And it's that relationships and particularly that reputation piece that this moral bravery has the most impact upon. It's interesting, we're recording this podcast, the day before the England-Denmark semi-final in the Euros. So I have to get a little football example in at some point, don't I? But I was thinking about Gareth Southgate and the England team. That I sense a moral bravery about this team in terms of the way they behave on the pitch and off the pitch. And I think that moral bravery, that there is a feeling that they're in pursuit of the mission. The mission is to win a major tournament, and they're having to be brave. I do pick up from the way they talk, the way they present themselves in that team, that there isn't the same ego about that team as England teams of old. There does appear to be a willingness to self-sacrifice, a willingness to be subsume the individual needs to the team needs in pursuit of this mission. And I'm really inspired by the moral bravery of that squad and the leadership. And I really hope they seize the prize, from being brave enough to stick to the guns around and stick their necks out, as we know they have done, on issues both on the field and off the field.
I think that is a great example, John. And I wrote a piece the other day about how I see Gareth Southgate as a man of what I call actually both strength and caring. But within that, I spoke about the emotional intelligence I think he brings to the team. And part of that is definitely bravery. If you remember, he actually speaks of, he made a decision, he took a brave decision around the team against Germany, knowing full well that he said he would get slated if we didn't win.
Yeah.
But it was a bravery in a sense of maybe not playing certain players, having a certain system. But as you said, it was wider than just a kind of one-off. It feels like it's I dare to call it holistic, but it has, you said, it seems to have a widespread throughout the team. They seem to know what they're doing. So thank you. It's a really interesting example of how bravery can actually galvanize perhaps a team or even an organization. And we'll hear about that actually a little bit more from Fiona in a short while. But one thing I wanted to ask you was, you talk in the book, and I like this example. If we go, because I think there's at least two things I've heard now. One is actually that you can have this, choosing to be brave can have this moral courage of actually stepping out for the greater good, perhaps innovating, perhaps changing things, doing things which are perhaps pushing the envelope a little bit. And then you talk about in the book as well, and you've spoken today about the moral aspect. And I like that you brought in the example of the book, and I think the film, The 12 Angry Men, where I think 11 say, the guy's guilty, and one man sticks his hand up and says, no, he isn't guilty. And the film then unravels how he then actually shares his reasoning and how the decisions change. But I think, as you said, that's not an easy stance to take, is it? So what advice would you have to those listening around how can you be like that one angry man or one angry woman, and how can you actually exercise moral bravery in your organization? Because I know from experience, it's not an easy thing to do.
No, it isn't. It's a very tough thing to do. So you need a very good reason to do it. And I think there are two areas where I think leaders that I've worked with, draw upon to generate that motivation to be brave. One actually links to another, the habits in the model, the habit of consistency, because being consistent as a leader is linked to a values-driven leadership style. And I think if you know what your values are, and if you sense that you're in a situation, for example, like that 12 Angry Men, where there's an individual there in a situation where they're about to compromise their values. Let's say that person had a value of honesty, and they're about to compromise that value by not speaking the truth of what they think. I think if you're very conscious about your values and you've made the decision to live by your values, then that can give you, that's one of the ingredients that can give you the motivation to be brave, because you don't want to have your values trampled upon, because you're recognizing that your values in the long run are critically important to your reputation. The other source, I think, of motivation to be brave, we talked about the mission, we talked about England wanting to win a major football tournament. So I think if you have a clear mission, a clear cause, we talked last time about the evangelize habit, that you have that vision, you know what your why is, and you're on a mission, you're running the race, you can see what the prize looks like. And if you know that by not being brave, you're going to compromise that mission, I think that also is a source of great motivation. And of course, if you're doing that with another group of people who also share that mission, it's easier to be brave together. It's much harder to be brave on your own. So I think values-based leadership, the mission, clarity of the mission, these are the sort of frameworks that can enhance your bravery if you make them explicit and important in your decision making.
Thank you, John. And also what I really like in the chapter as well is how you do a sort of deep dive where you look at, really, you speak in the book about, if your values are being trampled, there's a sense of this moral, choosing to be brave. But then you also talk about, and I just wanted to bring this to the table because I think it's really important. It's perhaps an area organizations may not reflect on too heavily, but you speak of the difference between felt anger and expressed anger. Could you share that? Because I just thought that was a great point when I read it.
Yeah. It's a concept that comes from another researcher, and the difference. We often think of anger stereotypically. We think of it as a bad thing. You shouldn't get angry. No one wants to be the angry boss. I think when we talk about anger in that way, we're often talking about expressed anger, or anger that's expressed in a certain way that hurts or violates other people. But there is a felt anger, there is a righteous anger that can be felt when your values are being compromised, that spurs you to action. And if you can channel that anger constructively, and I think many of the great sort of leaders, that we've known, have found a way to channel their anger in a very constructive fashion over a period of time, and they convert. I mean, it's a very thin line, isn't it, between passion and anger? You know, so we want passionate leaders who are driven to pursue a cause. We don't want that to tip over into reckless anger or indiscriminate anger. But I think anger is much misunderstood and needs to be thought of a little bit more carefully, in terms of sometimes that anger provides a drive, which is important in being brave. It's then all about how you express it. So I think, as I say, it's an interesting conversation to have with leaders who have often been taught that anger is bad in all its shapes and sizes. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think felt anger, is a natural human emotion that exists for a reason. And I think part of it is to spur us to bravery and action.
I'd agree with that, John. I know from my personal experience, I'm quite gentle in the way I approach things, and I work with groups. And I have known in times where I've had perhaps this felt anger, and I've chosen to be brave and express it, but not in a way that hurts people. I've probably been concerned, have I gone too far? Have I said too much? Because I've spoken out of this, from this place of felt anger. And what surprised me, John, is how people then said, David, in that moment, we really saw you, really felt you. We can tell how important this area is to you. And strangely, John, it connected them into me more deeply, and me vice versa to them. So that's why I kind of mentioned this point, because I think it's a real important one. And I think in this particular chapter, there's some areas which are just brilliantly, points that are brilliantly made. The other one that also touched me as well is, you say it's necessary to be scared in order to be brave.
Yeah.
That feels vulnerable, actually.
Yeah. You know, I think I say in the book about, you know, it's not about being fearless. It's about overcoming, not being paralyzed by fear. You know, it's about, if you don't feel scared, how can you be brave? It's about not being paralyzed by that feeling of fear. You know, the book, you know, title, Susan Jeffers' book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. You know, so we're not trying to create people here who don't feel scared, because if you never feel scared, you've probably got some other issues as a leader that might take you down a very different path. So we're not, because emotionally intelligent leaders will feel scared. If you never feel scared, you're probably missing, you know, a sort of an emotional antennae of some sort. So it's about feeling that, being honest about that, and as you say, that can be a place of vulnerability, but still having the capacity to act, still having the capacity to respond, and make decisions and act, while still feeling that natural fear, you know. And I say that the world of power, that heroic leader was fearless, you know, but it's a myth, David. We know it's a myth. There's never been a fearless leader. It's absolute nonsense. But we sort of bought into that myth for many years. But I think more and more people now are waking up and saying, you know what, that's a load of nonsense. You know, you are just like me. You get scared. I get scared. They get scared. So let's talk about that honestly, and let's work out how we don't get frozen by that fear, but we actually still have the capacity to act in that moment.
Wonderful, wonderful. And as I said to you, John, before, I often have a moment where I hear one of the audience saying, ask John this, ask John this. So the question I have coming through me is there may be leaders listening to this going, oh, this is a great conversation, are really getting me thinking and feeling about this area. But one of their concerns maybe is that culturally, when we've had people that have been morally brave and have chosen to speak up, they are, and I think it is a label, I'm not think it's really helpful, they are called whistleblowers. And we know from experience that quite often whistleblowers, although they might turn out to have stood up for the right thing, for the greater good, are quite often vilified. So the question coming through me is, as a leader, how can I help my organization choose to be morally brave without stepping over into being called whistleblowers and being being denigrated or not being treated with the respect that it deserves, because I'm not sure we've got this right yet from a Western culture perspective.
No, I think whistleblower is power-based language. It's language that comes from the era of power-based leadership. So it's a little bit of a hangover, I think, that term. I don't think it's an appropriate phrase. I don't think we'll be using that phrase in 5 years' time. I really don't, because it has a stigma associated with it, which is not helpful. But I think if as a leader you want to encourage your people to be morally brave without using that terminology, I think it's a more subtle process of identifying and praising small acts of moral bravery repeatedly over a period of time. So when you're in a meeting as a leader and you notice somebody speaking out based on their values, or you notice somebody expressing some felt anger about an issue because it compromises their principles, or people are getting agitated because the company values are in danger of being compromised, then I think you as a leader, that's the moment to highlight that behavior and pour attention and praise on it. Because when people witness that the leader says it's okay around here to be morally brave, then you'll find that permission granting will happen, and people will start to naturally have braver conversations. And we use this phrase, don't we, a lot now, about psychological safety.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the definition of psychological safety in a group is the ability to engage in interpersonal risk taking, and that's a lot about bravery.
Mm-hmm.
So psychologically safe environments, you will find that people are braver in those environments because the leaders of those environments are keeping it safe for people to be brave. And so I think that's the sort of leadership that will create morally brave cultures over a period of time. And we're therefore looking to build that moral bravery positively, rather than waiting for a whistleblower, in inverted commas, to identify the negative, breaches of that situation, because then we're into we're into completely different cycle then if we wait for the whistleblower to why do we need a whistleblower? Why was it ever thought that the leader is not always the whistleblower, if we want to use that language? As I say, I don't particularly like the language, but why would the leader have ever given the whistle to anybody else to blow? Isn't that their job?
It is, isn't it, from a moral perspective to actually step in, and also I think from a moral perspective to be open and listen to what people are saying. And I know in his research, in his book, Professor Jody Fry, with his spiritual leadership model, actually talks about the importance of people being understood and heard. And there's a big difference, I think we know this, John, around people being understood and heard, as opposed to actually being absolutely agreed with and that decision made on their basis. And I think this aspect of having a culture which supports people being brave is something that's really just come out for me in this conversation as being really important and really quite transformational. So, gosh, I could go on, but thank you. We'll move on, actually, because I said those listening are probably getting a real sense of what the habit choosing to be brave is, and really the intricacies and I think the benefits it provides to an organization. However, they're also probably curious from a practical perspective, asking, well, how have executives actually used this leadership habit to make a real difference in their organization? So as usual, I've recorded a short interview with Fiona Furman, who's the communications manager from NHL Group, who've embedded the trusted executive model in their organization. So we're going to hear from her on how they've used the habit choosing to be brave. And I know, John, you haven't heard this before, so I look forward to hearing your response. Hi, so once again, I'm with Fiona Furman, the communications manager with NAHL Group, a group of consumer legal businesses, including National Accident Helpline. And as an organisation, NAHL are using the Trusted Executive Framework to empower the way they work and serve their customers. Now, today we're in the third pillar of trustworthiness, that of benevolence, the extent to which we walk our talk. And we move on to the 8th leadership habit, choosing to be brave. So Fiona, how have you used the 8th leadership habit, choosing to be brave, within your organisation to make a real difference in the world?
Thanks. Yeah, it's been really interesting because in about 2015, a new branch of reforms came in regarding personal injury, which is very much one of the areas that my company works in, and it was going to have a seismic impact on the industry. And so our leaders sat down and they were like, oh, what are we going to do about this? It's it's potentially really quite damaging for us. Because as a claims management company, the role of the business then was to kind of get claims in, triage them, and then pass them off onto a panel of law firms. And the reforms that were coming in were going to have a huge impact on the number of claims that were likely to come in, the amount of damages that people would be able to get as a result. And so what happened then was, in the interest of being incredibly brave, really, as I look back on it now, I think it's braver now than I perhaps did at the time. We started the process of actually launching our own law firm, so our own wholly owned law firm, to help manage some of these claims, which has been a fascinating experience, but also it's been really, really successful. So it means that we have a whole different way of working, a whole different way of operating. The skills that we need in our business are very different. The way that we're regulated is different. We're now regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority as opposed to the Financial Services Authority as we were previously. So it's been a huge change for us. And the business really committed to that. And they did months and months and months of analysis and planning and looking at what the consumer journey was and looking at ways that we could make that better for the consumer. So are there any ways that we can streamline that experience for them and reduce any frustration they might feel about having to maybe tell their stories twice, once to the person that they speak to in our business, and then again to the person they speak to at the solicitor's office. So just looking at all of these ways and that we can support consumers in that way. And 2 years ago, just over, National Accident Law was launched as our wholly owned law firm, and it's gone fantastically well. And we're launching. It's still growing, still developing. We've still got new ideas. We've got what's called our one call process, which is taking everything from start, from end to end within one phone call where possible, and a digital process as well, so we can do as much as possible online for some claims. So it's been a really hugely brave step. It would have been really easy for the business to go, well, we're not really sure what that's going to involve, so perhaps we'll just sit tight and see how it shakes out and see what happens. But the business really just took this whole idea kind of by the horns and sat down and went, right, well, we need to make sure that we weather this particular storm. What's the best way that we can do that? And it's been a fascinating experience, but it's also just been really successful. But yeah, I think it was one of the, as I say, when I look back on it now, it feels braver even than it was, at the time. I think when you're in it, you perhaps don't realise quite what a big thing your company is doing and is involved. And afterwards you look back and go, man, that was brave.
Digging a little deeper, what for you has been a personal insight or personal growth moment through using the choosing to be brave leadership habit?
Yeah, I think I am a naturally quite cautious person. So being brave is quite challenging for me. But I think when I have used that habit and when I have been brave, I think what I perhaps didn't expect was that it would be so exciting. So it's not just about doing a brave thing and it being quite nerve-wracking and quite scary, but it's actually really exciting. We're putting out into the deep, you're trying something completely different, you're doing something you haven't done before, you're approaching a situation that you wouldn't have dared approach previously, and all of these ideas that sound on the surface quite scary, when you actually start working with them and actually start behaving in that new and different way, it's incredibly liberating, it's incredibly exciting. And when you and again, it's a bit like how I said with the work example, when you come away at the end of it and you think, oh gosh, that was brave, but then you don't realize how brave it was at the time. You were kind of wrapped up in the fact it was quite exciting and that it meant that something new was going to come out of it. And I think that's part of it as well, is just that sense that we create new things when we're brave. New things happen.
So thank you, Fiona. I really appreciate your sharing and look forward to hearing you on the next Leadership Habit.
No problem. Many thanks.
Well, John, there was Fiona with an example from her organisation of choosing to be brave. So I'm looking forward to hearing what are your comments on that.
Well, it's always great to hear Fiona talking about these habits. I loved it when she said, looking back about setting up that law firm, she said, man, that was brave. and as she said about that word excitement, you could hear the excitement as Fiona talked about how they were brave. And, that is one of the upsides of being brave. And I've never sort of thought about it as clearly as Fiona put it. But but isn't it exciting to be brave? You know, it's not dull, it's not boring. You know, when you're brave, particularly if you're being brave in a team, man, it's exciting. So, you know, that's an important benefit to remember. But I also felt that Fiona's example about the law firm and then being brave to set up national accident law, it captured some of the things we talked about earlier, David, in as much that we live in a time of change and reform, social reform. I mean, we have all the ESG, environmental, social governance issues now that PLCs like NAHL Group are being increasingly scrutinized on and measured on by investors. So we live in a time of reform, governance reform, social reform, environmental reform. And therefore, in response to that, organizations are being prompted more and more to have to pioneer around those topics. And I think what we heard about from Fiona was that National Accident Helpline chose to pioneer. They didn't choose to sort of sit back and wait to be told to do something. They made a proactive decision. They knew that change was coming. They thought it through, and then they jumped and they were brave. And I think we're going to find more and more circumstances where board leaders are going to be in discussions where they'll be talking about climate change, or they'll be talking about Black Lives Matter, or they'll be talking about diversity. And then they'll be saying, are we brave enough to be the first people in our sector to do X? And it will be really exciting to do X, but it will also be really risky. But the prize will go to those that are brave enough to pioneer and to anticipate what is coming in terms of these social, environmental and governance reforms.
I agree, and it did very much tie back to our conversation about, you know, the innovative aspect of choosing to be brave. And I'm not sure if you picked up what I heard from her as well, which, because one of my passions is around customer service and services management. Of course, they're choosing to be brave with this new organization, but also what I heard as well was actually, if I come back to choosing to be brave, you know, for the greater good, they were looking actually to make the customer experience a lot smoother. So deal everything else, she said, I think, with a one handoff. So they weren't getting, with a one-stop shop. They weren't getting handed off. They were just telling their story once about the claim, because they have this legal organization. So I really applaud that, because I think, as you said, they put some deep thought around that. So they were choosing to be brave with intent of, what does this actually mean for our customer? Now, of course, it's going to hopefully, you know, improve the business and more clients, but they had this focus on what does it mean for the customer and the customer journey, which I applaud. And I think that's part of, maybe, you know, you mentioned Steve Jobs and Apple, that actually thinking about what difference this may make for those that we work with. Yeah, and trusting that putting the needs of those people first, and putting the mission first, you know, will in the long run also deliver a great business in terms of revenue, profit, cash flow, and all those other things that, you know, every business needs to take care of. But, you know, what is the master and what is the slave? You know, is the driving force behind a company that mission and that sense of service to stakeholders, or is it, you know, the bottom line and the single bottom line, and you know, that leads every conversation. So I think it's about, you know, making that bigger vision the master, rather than being led by those shorter term financial variables. Absolutely. And one of the things that I did speak to Fiona about when she said that was, we've spoken about actually fear coming up with choosing to be brave, and she spoke about how it can be quite it can be exciting when you're choosing to be brave. So what I said to her is, quite often there's this thing that I call how something can be scary exciting. So it recognizes the fear, but then actually says there's an excitement around it. And so that there's something in there, as you said, when she gave her personal reasons, you could actually see or feel, I think, the benefits for her choosing to be brave and choosing to see the benefits of doing that. So so thank you for your comments on that. Now, we've already touched a little bit on this one, so because the next question was, we know that the habits work together, they don't just work in isolation. And I think you've said already talked about choosing to be consistent, but I'm just asking you, how does this habit, choosing to be brave, work alongside the other habits in the model? Yeah, I think
I plan to sort of leave this comment till now, but I happened to bring it in earlier about the habit of consistency and the habit of evangelize. I do think they are the habits that link very closely to this one. Consistency, because a lot of consistency is about knowing what your values are and making decisions on a consistent basis based on your personal values and your company values. And I think that can be the source of discipline when it comes to being brave, that your values can prompt you to be brave. And equally, the evangelize habit, the mission can prompt you to be brave. If you're clear about the mission, if you've got that passion and that excitement about the mission, then it will be easier to be brave. So I think those are the two habits that I think of first, David. That there is a habit also around the whole integrity pillar, being honest, being open, being humble. Mm-hmm. I do think is important, really, for how you respond. You know, there's a question I'm anticipating a little bit where we're going, because I know you always ask me the question about what to do when things go wrong.
Yeah, we are going there, yes.
We are going there. So apologies for jumping the gun with that. But if you get it wrong with being brave, it implies that you've been something of a moral coward, I suppose, is maybe the most difficult word for us to contemplate. And if you find it, and you know, we'll all have done that at certain points, whether it's on big issues or small issues, we'll have all have docked it at certain points and avoided the difficult decision. And then there are consequences. You know, I like that quote from Robert Louis Stevenson, you know, sooner or later we all sit down to a banquet of consequences. And if we're not brave, sooner or later we will sit down to a banquet of consequences. And those consequences are likely not to be good. And I think, you know, that will happen. That will happen to every leader at some point. What do we do then? I think it is those habits, those integrity habits. Be honest, be open, be humble. It's really about saying sorry. Be honest, be open, be humble. Say sorry. I mean, that's really the only thing I think that's left if you find that you haven't been brave, and that you've been held accountable for that lack of bravery because something's gone wrong on your watch. And you know, there is this moment when your instinct is to defend and to justify, but if you want to use the habits, then that's also the moment to say sorry.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And also bring in here, John, as well at this point, that, and this habit, choosing to be brave, is a real deep one for me as we go through this, because it requires that popular word now, mindfulness or choosing or presence or insight or awareness. Because in the book you give an example of really there's an element of conflict here in that you chose one thing over another. So in the example in the book, which I'll just ask you about, is you kept a personal confidence from someone shared, but it resulted in not speaking up about a misdoing of I think one of the senior managers or directors. So there was a conflict there, wasn't there, John? I don't know if you want to speak about that, between keeping that confidence, between choosing to be brave, and you know, what did that mean to you? Because it's almost like you said, you know, you won't always get it right around this one. What was your learning from that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a chastening experience that I had, and I was held to account for it. You know, there was a consequence. And it's interesting. I was reading this chapter of the book before the podcast, and I read the bit where I you know, talked about, you know, it's a lesson I've never forgotten. And then I put, the bravest call is the call that protects the integrity of the entire system, rather than the integrity of any one individual or group within that system. And when I read that, you know, and obviously you write a book, you know, 5 years ago, you forget what you've written. And I read that today, and I thought, yeah, the bravest call is the call that protects the integrity of the entire system. And as leaders, you know, we are guardians of the integrity of the system. Whatever the system is, it could be a family, it could be an organization, it could be a political party, but we are guardians of the integrity of the system. And that's, I think we have to hold that as our highest measure of moral bravery. Yes, you can protect the integrity of an individual or a subgroup within that system, which is what I did in this example. But I think I was right to be called to account, to say, John, yeah, but in doing that, you compromise the integrity of the whole system. And if you think, I then in the book talk about, you know, the big issues we've had with, you know, lack of integrity in the banking system, lack of integrity in sport because of drug taking. You know, we know that there are examples probably in those occasions where people have protected individuals and protected groups, but in the process they've compromised the integrity of the whole sport, the whole sector. You know, and we have to, we as leaders, I think, have to realize that that's the highest version of moral bravery, is when you protect the system. And we will come back to talk about this later, David, when you talk about why this means so much to me at a personal level.
Yes, thank you, John. It's, you know, these kind of real life examples of what it means, you know, choosing to be brave are really resonating with me. And I won't go into my personal examples now, but thank you. I really do. I get this one. And they are, John, they're make or break moments for me around the integrity of the organization, around sometimes, are we going to go together either as a team, as an organization, as a business, because there's something about these moments that they are, and I like that word, you know, kairos moments, that actually things can literally change on these moments. So I'm sure those listening will have their own examples of when they did or didn't do something. And this isn't about, you know, blaming or shaming anyone, but it is about, I think, realizing that we can have the ability to actually, in the moment, or perhaps even after the moment, coming back to it the next day, to respond in a way which, as you said, holds the integrity of the whole system, which I just think that's just a really powerful point in the podcast. So thank you. So we've shared lots of stuff, and this is the point here I ask you, that for the listeners out there, how can they get further resources and hands-on experience of this habit, choosing to be brave, to try them out and make a real difference for their organization?
Yeah, there's a lot of resources that we've gathered together on our website, you know, trustedexecutive.com, and when we're gathering together resources for each habit, including this podcast, you know, so if there's any particular habit that you want to go deeper into, then the website has articles, blogs, you know, resources, videos that people can access to look at. I mean, I think for this particular habit, being brave, you know, we've talked today about examples in our life, you know, where we've seen that bravery, or we're seeing that bravery at the moment with the England football team. I do think that a great resource for this habit is reading about inspiring examples of people that did this. You know, there's a couple of examples that come to mind for me, you know, people that have inspired me in a business, one in a business setting and one in a political setting. So that in the book, I talk about the story of John Spedden Lewis, who was the co-founder of the John Lewis Group back in 1864, and he co-founded it with his father. Spedden Lewis, the son, had this radical idea, this pioneering idea, this social reform idea, that he wanted to redistribute the profits to the staff. His father thought he was a communist and stopped speaking to him, banished him, rejected him. You know, incredibly hurtful sort of thing to have happened. But Spedden Lewis was so inspired by his values and by his mission that didn't stop him. He was that brave that he coped with the rejection by his father. And of course, you know, his father died, and John Lewis stores became the most trusted brand, you know, in the retail sector. So I think stories like that are just incredibly inspiring, you know. And Spedden Lewis, you know, he didn't do an MBA, he didn't do, you know, he didn't read a book, you know. He just knew that, you know, in his guts, that there was something there that he cared about. So that's one example from the world of business. And in the world of politics, I've just finished reading the book by Joe Biden called Promise Me Dad. And it's all about Joe Biden's year when his son had brain cancer and died from brain cancer whilst he was vice president of the United States. And when you read that book and you sort of witness what he was putting up with at the time, what he was dealing with, and still doing that job, you know, in that one of the highest offices in the most powerful country in the world. Again, it's just inspiring that, you know, there are people out there being very, very brave from a moral perspective. And I think the more you can expose yourself to those stories, whether it's through biographies or films or, you know, whatever, these things lift you up. And I think they are also part of what can really give you an insight into how to be brave and why it matters.
Yes, absolutely. And those I work with, we quite often look at who their, and I call them, you know, their heroes or spiritual heroes are, and what they can actually draw upon. So, you know, so I would take, you know, someone such as Martin Luther King, who kind of was choosing to be brave and standing up, and when his other white, you know, preacher ministers were telling him to sit down and not take action, it was the way then actually chose to be brave. And we know what happened to him in the end. You know, he took it to the nth degree, but choosing to be brave and doing it. And it was also then you spoke about integrity, you know, the integrity of the non-violent action, the way they actually conducted themselves, the way they actually then stood up for what they believed in, was incredibly brave and a great way of doing it. And maybe just finally on that, I'm sure each organization, for those listening, has these sort of stories that within the organization, but perhaps aren't always given airspace to be heard. So that might be an action someone listening to the podcast can do, is actually, well, let's have a day, let's hear some of the stories where people have chosen to be brave, because as you said, those inspire others to do likewise, and don't they? I think
that's a really good point, David. I think storytelling, you know, inside an organization, storytelling around when people have been brave, when the organization has been brave, just like Fiona did earlier today. I think that storytelling is really powerful. And you're right, you know, are we doing enough of that storytelling in our organizations to highlight and celebrate these moments of bravery?
Thank you. Now, we may have covered the bulk of this one, because you're quite right. You said I'm going to jump to this one, because there is a point where I ask you about, you know, that this habit, choosing to be brave, and what you do when choosing to be brave goes wrong. So is there anything else you want to add? Because we have touched on this already.
The only thing I want to add, David, on this one is an example really of when things go wrong. And I talked earlier about anger and felt anger. When I share this story, I will feel angry. You know, this is the story of, you know, the post office Horizon system, you know, implemented in the year 2000, and 736 post office leaders sort of prosecuted, 39 of which went to jail because of being accused of, you know, taking money from the post office, when in actual fact, it turns out that this is a system error and bug that was concealed for years and years and years. And that case is still ongoing. There has still been no one held accountable. No one has said sorry. Am I angry about that when I read that story? Yes, I am. And I think every person in this country should be angry about what has been perpetrated there in terms of cowardice, moral cowardice, in terms of the lack of accountability, the lack of anybody getting up and standing up and saying, yeah, this was wrong. We're sorry. And you know, and they will, you know, they will find, you know, that quote that we said, you know, sooner or later we all sit down to a banquet of consequences. Those consequences will come, but it should have taken much less than 20 years for us to get to the point where we're at with that particular breach of trust, you know, that has happened, as I say, in one of our major institutions in this country. And I think it brings, yeah, it tars us all in this country, that story. And you know, as I say, as I tell it, I feel that righteous anger that we talked about earlier, and it gives me the passion to keep banging on about trust, because, you know, these are people's lives that were completely ruined and wrecked because of a lack of trustworthiness in leadership. And so that's what drives me to do this work, is when you read case studies like that about what happens when things go wrong through a lack of bravery.
Yes, that's so, John. And I guess I totally agree with you on that, because I did hear it on the radio the other day when some of those that have been vindicated in their innocence were speaking. And it's incredulous that it can go on for such a long time, because, of course, there were a number of people that knew what was happening in this situation, and for whatever reason, you know, remained silent over it. Where in this instance, and maybe this is one saying, actually choosing to be brave in this instance, you said, John, it actually saves people from going to jail. and yes, they might think, well, actually, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose that. But there's actually saying, well, how do you weigh that up against someone going to jail and actually knowing something about this? It brings the whole organization into a sense of, can I trust this organization? And I don't know the ins and outs now of the post office, but it's going to, take time to actually rebuild that trust. So, that's just given a really good example of why, this is one of the habits of all of them is really important.
Yeah.
Now, talking of importance, we're getting to the point, the question I really enjoy about why this habit matters to you. And this is really an invite to be brave and to dive a bit deeper. So John, why does this habit personally matter to you? And as you know, there are two levels. So I am inviting you to be brave and explore both.
Yeah, so I think the first level we talk about is more in terms of my own career and business experience, and the second level is more to do with my spiritual faith. In terms of my business career, I mean, I start this chapter in the book with a prayer, actually, and it's interesting because the publisher of the book told me that I couldn't possibly put any Christian references into a business book, but I still managed to do it and sort of surreptitiously put in here at the beginning of this chapter the Serenity Prayer, which is a prayer that reads, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think in my business career as a leader, I've always felt that I've been grappling with that sort of tightrope of what are the things that I need to accept. We live in an imperfect world. There are some things we just have to accept. But what are the things that I need to have the courage to change? And then, please give me the wisdom to know the difference. And I think if in my career, that those three lines, capture about 80% of the most difficult decisions that I will have made as a leader. And at what point do you accept? At what point do you challenge and have the courage? And where is the wisdom that allows you to make that choice? So that's the level at which it's been important to me as a business leader. I think then, when we go on to talk about why is this important to me from a point of view of my spiritual faith as a Christian, and it's interesting. I didn't plan this at all, David, but it came to me as we were talking about my example and what I'd learned from it. And when I read that phrase, the bravest call is the call that protects the integrity of the entire system, rather than the integrity of any one individual or group within that system. And I talk about inspiring individuals. Then, of course, Jesus Christ, as an inspiring leader, is a man who went to the cross in order to protect the integrity of the entire system, rather than the integrity of any one individual or group within that system, including himself. So Jesus' words that he came to give his life as a ransom for many. So if you're a Christian, as I am, then the reason why the cross is so significant to you as a Christian is you see that as the moment of highest moral bravery that has ever been sort of witnessed, that this man gave his life, and in doing that, he was doing it to protect the integrity of Oz. Now we'd have to go into a lot of more deeper theological sort of explanation as to why that was what he was doing. But if you are a Christian, you basically look at Jesus Christ on the cross and you say, he did that for me and for us and for you and for us. And if he did that for me, then surely I need to do something for him. It's just like, in the face of such moral bravery, what other response is there other than to trust that person and to follow that person? So that is a lot of the inspiration that allows me to trust that leader and to commit to the mission and the values of that way of living. So I hope that hopefully in a sort of in a fairly accessible way, just helps bring that moral bravery into that context of a spiritual leader, and explain why some people find that incredibly inspiring.
Thank you, John. And actually, you've made me think of something which I haven't really thought about before, and that's, I think we can look at the Christian faith. We can probably look at any of the other faiths, including Buddhism. And of course, part of the reason we have the texts and our way of doing things and traditions is that people, I think, have actually recognized this integrity, this bravery, and have looked, for want of a better word, to codify it, to write it down, to capture it, because it's been so inspiring. And I think that's another thing, actually. This bravery, when it's, you said, to protect the whole system, is truly inspirational, in my view. And it's not, as you said, it's not for the weak-hearted. It does have fear. And as he was speaking, as we shared before, I've had the privilege of going to the Holy Land and have been to the Garden of Gethsemane. And so we know before the cross, it says Jesus wept. I mean, he kind of wept blood, and there was a lot of fear around that. And when you're there in the garden, you see what's supposed to be the rock there, you can almost get it, and it's surrounded by a black fence, iron railed pointed fence. You get a sense of the fear and the frightening, but then I think the bravery that carried through that to actually know, with an intent, no, this is what I'm choosing to do. I'm choosing to be brave, and this is what I'm choosing to do. And if that sort of passion, if you like, for the greater good, as you described, can be translated in a way in an organization that actually they're choosing to be brave for the greater good, then I just have this real deep feeling that actually then within the organization, we spoke about stories, people get this. Because we spoke about stories, why in the Christian faith, why are we so inspired by that? Because the stories that are there, are captured in the Gospels, inspire us.
Yeah.
And I think that's the element of that. And it comes back to the other thing we've always spoken about in these podcasts, is that when we get to each of these habits, am I walking my talk? Am I doing what I'm saying? And here's an example here of Jesus. Well, I was saying that I'm truly walking his talk. He didn't kind of step out and go, "Oh, I've had enough now." It was like, no, actually, this is what I'm doing. And and I think that is that's quite often that's the inspiration, that actually here's someone who could, from some Christian theological perspective, could have chosen to sidestep it, not go through with it. But he chose, this was the route that he was going to take. And it's such incredible bravery. And we know what happened after that, how that inspired future generations.
Yeah. And to use that word that Fiona used earlier, how incredibly exciting. Yeah. How incredibly exciting. I mean, blimey. Fiona said that she looked back and at setting up that law firm, and she said, man, it was brave. I mean, can you imagine looking back 2020 years to that story, of the cross, and you look back on it and you go, wow, that is just so brave. It's it just blows your mind. So, but anyway, that's where we get. That's where we get.
And almost to bring this podcast through to almost a theological close, John, what just came to me is, from the Christian faith perspective, because Jesus was demonstrating ultimate trust. And I've thought of this before. He saw God as the ultimate, maybe trusted executive in one way, that actually placed his trust fully on the table there and said, actually, I trust what's happening here is unfolding exactly how it should be, no matter how hard it is.
Yeah.
So that's a good close, that one. That was like...
nice one, David, yeah.
So, John, actually that was almost a call to action almost. How can those listening discover or explore the 9 habits of trust, maybe via a keynote or workshop program or newsletter? And I know you call this an invitational model, that you're quite clear that it's not something that's forced upon someone, but people are invited to actually adopt it to their organizational circumstances. So how can they get involved with it?
Well, the Trusted Executive Foundation, we're a not-for-profit consultancy that is here to create a new standard of leadership defined by trustworthiness. And if that is a pioneering mission that other leaders are excited about and are bravely wanting to implement in their cultures of their organizations and with their teams, then clearly we would love to help those people, and we believe that this model, this academically verified model, is a formula and a roadmap to go on that journey. And so we'd be delighted to talk to anyone who's excited as we are about that possibility. And we talk about a journey of trust, and we talk about phases in that journey, and depending upon the ambition and the resources of the organization, we can help leaders go on that journey to whatever extent they would like to pursue it, particularly using coaching and executive coaching and team coaching as the tool to help make these habits and the choices that come with them more instinctive in an organization or in a team over a period of time. So yeah, that would be, as I say, we'd be delighted to engage with anyone who's listening, who is as excited as we are about these possibilities.
I'll come back to the excitement in just a second. I was going to say, how can people get in touch with you? Is it an email, or is the website? How can they get in touch with you?
More than happy for people to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think it's probably the easiest way to reach out to me personally. And as an organization, trustedexecutive.com is the website. There's a contact form on that website. So I think those are probably the easiest ways for people to get in touch, David.
That's great. I shall put them in the link below. Now I can hear people saying to me, David, you and John just got so excited that you've actually missed out one of our favorite bits. And that is, so I'm going to, before we close, I'm going to go back to, we know that as well as the Trusted Executive book, you've also published a book, Coaching Poetry from a Spiritual Path. And of course, as you said, whatever your own religious beliefs, these poems will challenge you to think deeply and inspire you to take the next step on your own spiritual path, your own leadership path. So before we close out, I'm going to invite you, John, around Choosing to Be Brave, to share a poem from the book that has touched you in respect of choosing to be brave as a leadership habit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Dave, because we almost forgot this, and I actually forgot to prepare for it. But thankfully, in my list of poems here, there is one called The Morally Brave, which which I think gives us a clue as to which
that's the one to go for.
So it's not a hard choice of which poem to read. So I'm going to read this poem, which is titled The Morally Brave. Thus decay, unrest, and decadence provides fertile ground for new seeds. Nature's courage knows no bounds, brings forth from the famine a feast of untold delight, speaks to us with compelling truth, brings forth the meek who have waited long, those who hold the heart of the age. That which has no physical might or empirical proof, yet commands the lion and the lamb as it reaches into their common soul. Lo, the meek will be the bravest when the flesh finally runs weak, for in them the spirit burns brightest. They carry that which does not know how to die, that which always prevails with timeless ease, the ark, the covenant, the grail, the blueprint of our higher consciousness. So now, you of the highest moral ground, claim your inheritance, free us with your courage as the master frees the slave.
Wonderful. It's one of those moments I take a deep breath on that. That's lovely. And I really liked it. I heard that thing of holding the heart of the age. Isn't that a wonderful thing to think about, leaders, execs, and members within the organization actually really striving to hold the heart of the age and to live that out in the world through their organization. So I think, John, that's a fine close for our podcast. I'm sure those listening may even want to go back and replay that poem and get hold of the book itself. I do put a reference to the book below the podcast, Coaching Poetry from a Spiritual Path. And if you've been listening to these podcasts, it's a superb resource to get hold of. So, John, thank you for stepping out into this business world with a real heart and a passion for supporting businesses to be the best way they can. And I don't know if you want to just say just a few closing words to those listening.
As always, thank you for listening. If you got to the end of this one, that's great. I hope that poem was a little bit extra that you got for your patience and persistence today with us. So, and I suppose as always, end with a note of encouragement. If you want to be braver, then start small. Practice, experiment. Habits can be built, that muscle can be built over a period of time. You don't have to go out and run the marathon tomorrow. You can start with a 3-mile jog. So it's the same with these habits, that you can practice being brave and practice in those small ways, and then gradually you will find that you will build the capacity to be braver and braver. So just wish you well with that next step, and thanks for listening today.
Thank you, John. So actually the final habit number 9, is choosing to be kind. So until next time, may you all have a wonderful day.